Welcome to Python Fundamentals Part 1 of 5. My name is Paul Deitel, and I'll be your instructor for these live lessons videos. I'm the CEO of Deitel and Associates, Inc., an MIT grad with 38 years of experience in computing, and also one of the world's most experienced programming languages trainers, having been teaching programming training since 1992. Throughout these live lessons videos, you're going to be working hands-on with the Python programming language. This is now one of the world's most popular programming languages, and it's also the fastest growing among them. Professionals often discover quickly that they really like Python for a number of reasons. It's a general-purpose programming language, so you can use it for lots of different tasks. It's concise and extremely expressive, so you can really write a lot of complex applications with relatively minimal amounts of code. It's very readable, so it's easy to learn. It's interactive because there's an interactive mode in the IPython interpreter that we'll be using, so you can go right down to the individual programming snippet level and see exactly what that statement or snippet is going to do immediately. There's a massive open source community surrounding Python as well, developing incredibly powerful libraries that you're going to take advantage of over the 5 parts of these live lessons. And the job market in particular for Python is extremely strong right now, especially for anybody who has any kind of data science skills and artificial intelligence skills as well. Part 1 of these Python Fundamentals live lessons videos is based on the Before You Begin section and chapters 1 through 4 of our recently published Python books, Intro to Python for Computer Science and Data Science, Learning to Program with AI, Big Data, and the Cloud, that's our textbook, and also our professional book, Python for Programmers. Many people find that as they work their way through the videos, it's helpful to have a copy of the book at hand. However, this is not required. There is additional information in the books that I don't cover as part of these videos. If you're interested in getting a copy of one of the books, you can find them in various print and electronic formats at the sites that are listed for you. If you're a college instructor, you'll probably want to take a look at Intro to Python for Computer Science and Data Science, which is our college textbook version of the book. This one is in full color. It's 880 pages, 240 pages more than Python for Programmers. And in particular, it contains a ton of exercises, 557 self-check exercises, as well as 471 additional end-of-chapter exercises and projects. Now, many professionals find that they like to work with the textbook version specifically because of the exercises. If you're interested in learning more about Intro to Python for Computer Science and Data Science, please take a look at the links that I've provided below. The first one is for an architectural diagram in which we show you the 4-part modular structure of this book, and that really applies both to the college textbook and our professional book, Python for Programmers, as well. The For Programmers book has one fewer chapter, but the overall architecture of the 2 books is the same. And also in the For Programmers book, we have less of the lower-end pedagogical material that's really geared to people who are novices in programming. The second link is for the full table of contents where you can see everything that we're going to cover throughout the book. And the third one is the book's preface where you can learn more about our approach to teaching Python, data science, artificial intelligence, and various big data topics. I'd also like to recommend that you take a look at these 2 additional links. The first one is for the full book cover, and in particular, if you look at the back cover copy, you'll see a nice summary of everything that we're going to do throughout these live lessons videos. And I'd also recommend that you take a moment to read through the technical and academic reviewer testimonials to really get a sense of all the things that they liked about how we presented Python and the various data science, AI, and big data topics. Next, let's talk about the modular architecture of these videos, which also applies to the books as well. In lessons 1 through 10 of these videos, we'll be focused on Python programming fundamentals. And throughout those lessons, we have at the end of each one an introduction to data science, in which we're going to introduce things like artificial intelligence, basic descriptive statistics, measures of central tendency and dispersion, simulation techniques, working with CSV files. We're going to introduce a really powerful library called pandas, which you'll use extensively throughout the rest of the lessons once we introduce it. And we're also going to start to take a look at the concepts of time series and simple linear regression. All of these topics are meant to help support the case study lessons that we'll be looking at in lessons 11 through 16. As you work through the high-end case study lessons in parts 4 and 5 of these Python Fundamentals LiveLessons videos, one of the things I'll be doing with you is introducing a lot of real-world data sets. Many of the libraries I'll present to you come bundled with data sets that you can use to learn about working with those libraries and learn various AI, data science, and big data topics as well. And in addition, you're going to find that you can acquire data sets from a wide range of sources. There are all sorts of data set repositories out there. Various governments provide big data sets that you can take advantage of, including the US government. And you'll also find that there's many additional data sets bundled with these libraries. And some of the libraries also give you convenient ways to load data sets from those massive data set repositories that are available to you. Now, after you've worked your way through lessons 1 through 5 and some parts of lessons 6 and 7, you'll actually be able to go ahead and attack the really cool concepts that we're going to be presenting to you in lessons 11 through 16. But I do encourage you not to skip any of the lessons along the way. There are lots of interesting topics in lessons 8, 9, and 10, including all of Python's object-oriented programming concepts as well. As we developed the content on which these live lessons videos are based, we kept 3 principles in mind. Keep it simple, keep it small, and keep it topical. With respect to keep it simple, one of the things we really wanted to do was make it super easy for people to get into the Python programming language. So we really strive for simplicity and clarity in our writing and in the way that we presented the material. We also preferred the simpler libraries that are available to us. So one of the things that you're going to get out of the 5 parts of these live lessons videos is an introduction to many different open source libraries, some of which are bundled with Python, some of which are simply available via the open source community. And whenever we had a choice between a couple of different libraries that could do the same thing, we always went with the one that was simpler to use. With respect to keep it small, you're going to find that the vast majority of the book's 538 code examples are extremely small, sometimes just 1 line of code or a few lines of code. However, when you're programming, you often are going to be building larger applications, so we also include 40 larger scripts and in-depth case studies as well. With respect to keep it topical, we did 1.5 years of research in preparation for writing our Python books and recording these Python videos as well. And normally when we get ready to write any book, we'll create what we call a resource center, and we'll have anywhere from 25 to 50 different key research pieces on which we will base our writings and the examples that we eventually use in these video recordings as well. Now, for the Python content, we actually had 1,500 different resource centers, each of which averaged around 10 different research pieces. So about 15,000 different pieces, whether they were books or articles or videos or blog posts, went into our research for this material. And what that enabled us to do was really take the pulse of all the different communities that we were trying to target with the content in this book, whether it be the computer science community, the data science community, the Python community in general, or the AI, big data, and cloud communities as well. And that also enabled us to create some really cool and interesting examples that I'll be presenting to you in these videos. The best way to use these videos is to watch a little and then do a little. And one of the reasons that it works so well to take that approach is the IPython interpreter that you'll see me using throughout my presentation. The IPython interpreter gives you immediate feedback, enabling you to write anything from a simple expression like 7 plus 3 and see the result, up through large chunks of code as well. And you can immediately execute those expressions, statements, and chunks of code and see the results. If you get an error, you can see the code and the error right next to each other, so you can go back and fix that problem and try again instantaneously. And if it's a correct piece of code, you can see the results immediately, which makes it a really great way to learn the language, explore the language, and also to explore the many different libraries that you have access to via the open source community. Throughout lessons 1 through 10, my key focus will be on presenting rich coverage of Python programming fundamentals. Now, not only will I be showing you the syntax of the language, but we'll also be looking at 3 different programming idioms. We'll look at procedural style programming in Python, object-oriented programming, and functional style programming as well. And throughout all of the examples, we'll be focusing on best practices and current Python idiom. During our 1.5 years of research leading into this project, one of the things that we found is that the vast majority of programming that people do in Python is what we like to refer to as object-based programming. You import a library, create an object of one of the types in that library, and then interact with that object. And one of the reasons that you're able to do that is the literally thousands of different Python libraries that are available to you. Now, the Python standard library itself has a tremendous number of what are called modules that you can import into your applications and use, and the table that you see on the screen is just a small subset of those libraries, and in particular ones that we'll be focusing on throughout these live lessons videos. In addition, we'll be focusing on lots of other open source libraries, many of which are actually installed with the Anaconda Python distribution that I'll be using as I present Python to you. On the screen now you see some of the key artificial intelligence, data science, and big data related libraries that we'll be presenting throughout these videos. During the 1850s gold rush, there was a saying, "There's gold in them thar hills." Well, in 2019 and 20 and beyond, we can say instead, there's gold in them thar data. Almost all of the cutting-edge applications that are being developed nowadays are data-driven applications, and specifically big data-driven applications. So another saying that you may have heard previously is that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, when you're talking about big data, a visualization, which is just a diagram, is something that could be worth billions or even trillions of data items in a big data source. So with that in mind, we're going to be presenting scores of static, dynamic, and interactive visualizations throughout these live lessons videos. And as you're going to see, with tiny amounts of code, you can create some really cool and interesting visualizations as well. And that's going to be really critical as you start making your way into big data applications development. The vast majority of data that we receive nowadays is so large that no human being can look at all of that data. So visualizations become critical in helping people understand what they're looking at. As we get into some of the higher end lessons, one of the things that we're going to start doing is talking about the different steps in a data science study. So we're going to show you how to obtain data and prepare it for analysis. And one of the things that we'll do after we obtain data is get to know that data. And in that case, visualization is often a key aspect of getting to know your data. We'll also talk about how to analyze data using many different techniques. And to do that, we're going to be building things like machine learning models and deep learning models. And one of the things you'll want to be able to do is to tune those models as well. And then finally, we'll want to communicate the results of our studies, which once again is often going to involve visualizations. In parts 4 and 5 of these live lessons videos, you're going to be working with many different predefined models that somebody else creates and trains for you and then makes available to you through the various libraries that we'll be importing and using in our Python applications. And you're also going to learn how to create your own models and train them based on data sets that are typically bundled with the libraries that we'll be introducing, although you can also download and use other data sets to train your models as well. Now, throughout those 2 lessons, we're going to look at all sorts of cool and interesting topics, starting with natural language processing. Then we'll move on to data mining Twitter, which is one of the most popular big data sources that are out there, and also one for which natural language processing is commonly used to perform a technique called sentiment analysis, where you look at the text of tweets and you basically determine if they're positive or negative about a given topic. And that could be used to do things like try to predict election results or try to predict how well a movie is going to do at the box office. We'll move on to IBM Watson and cognitive computing, where we'll build a cool interlanguage translator using their web services. We'll also take a look at building your own models in the machine learning and deep learning lessons. And then finally, we'll finish off with our big data lesson, where we'll cover topics like Apache Hadoop, Apache Spark, NoSQL databases, and the Internet of Things. Now that we've talked about all the different things that you'll see throughout parts 1 through 5 of these Python Fundamentals Live Lessons videos, let's talk specifically about what you'll do here in part 1. We'll start out with a Before You Begin lesson in which I'm going to talk about installing the Anaconda Python distribution, getting the code examples that we provide for you to execute on your own. And those code examples, by the way, are provided in 2 forms. You'll find them in source code files which end with a .py extension, and you'll be able to use those with the interactive IPython interpreter or to execute them as what we call scripts in Python. But we also provide what are known as Jupyter notebooks, which are interactive web-based notebooks that contain text. They can also contain images, audio, video, and live code that you can execute directly in your web browser. And you may find that those are actually a really nice way for you to interact with Python and learn about the Python programming language as well. I'll also talk about the 2 key Python package managers that you'll use for installing additional libraries throughout these live lessons videos. As we move on to lesson 1, we'll focus on 3 test drives where we'll show you 3 different ways to execute the Python code that we provide. One of which is going to be the IPython interactive mode, where you enter either expressions or statements and interactively execute them. Another is going to be to use IPython to execute scripts in their entirety. So those are full-blown applications that we'll develop in Python. And then finally, we'll do our introduction to the Jupyter Notebooks environment and show you how to get the environment up and running, how to load notebooks into Jupyter, and then how to execute code within a Jupyter notebook as well. In lesson 2, we're going to start getting into Python programming fundamentals. We'll look at basic statements, show you how to create variables in Python, and if you're coming from a strongly typed programming language, one of the things that you'll see about Python is that it's dynamically typed, so you don't have to state in advance that a given variable is going to hold an integer or a floating point number or a string. It figures all of that out for you, and it's always based on whatever that variable happens to be referring to at a given time. We'll look at some basic input and output as part of lesson 2. We'll also start to show you the various different forms of strings in Python. We'll show you, in fact, 3 different forms in lesson 2 and a couple of additional ones in subsequent lessons as well. And finally, at the end of lesson 2, we're going to start talking about the fact that everything in Python is an object, and we'll actually demonstrate some of that dynamic typing I was talking about as well. In Lesson 3, we'll be focusing on Python's control statements. And this is where you're starting to get a sense of how small the Python language really is. It has fewer overall keywords and statements than most of the other programming languages that you're probably coming from into Python. So we'll talk about the if statement and its 3 different forms here. We'll introduce the only 2 looping structures that Python has, the for loop and the while loop. And as you'll see, Python does not have a counter-controlled for loop. The one that we'll show you is for iterating over a sequence, and as part of that, we're going to start to introduce one of the key data structures in Python, which is known as a list, and that's similar to the concept of an array in other programming languages. In this lesson, we'll also talk about the augmented assignment operators and introduce the Boolean operators as well. In Lesson 4, we're going to start talking about how to create your own custom Python function definitions. Now, one of the things I always try to do in my live lessons videos is compare and contrast the current language I'm talking about, in this case Python, with the other programming languages that you may be familiar with. And in particular, Python is a C-based programming language, so you'll find that I will often compare Python to languages like C, C++, Java, and C# as well. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because the way you define functions in Python is somewhat different from those other programming languages. And that's a combination of the fact that Python uses different keywords and also the fact that Python is a dynamically typed language, whereas those other languages are statically typed. Now, in this lesson, we're also going to be talking a little bit more about how to import libraries so that you can use them in your applications. We're going to start to get into some basic simulation techniques with random number generation. We'll talk a little bit about scope in the context of functions, and we'll also show you some syntax things like default parameter values and keyword arguments as well. Towards the end of this lesson, we're also going to get into tuples for the first time, which are another key data structure in Python. And tuples basically allow you to aggregate a bunch of related items which may or may not be of the same type. And in this lesson, we'll use that capability to demonstrate how to return more than one value at a time from a function. Now, throughout part 1 of these Python Fundamentals Live Lessons videos, a couple of key things that you're going to see are a little bit of functional style programming and the first several of our Intro to Data Science sections. With regard to functional style programming, what you're typically going to be doing is saying what you want to accomplish, not how to accomplish a given task. And one of the reasons that we're able to do that is via libraries. The Python standard library is extensive. There are a ton of built-in functions and lots of additional libraries that you can import and use as well. And they take this kind of everything but the kitchen sink approach, where if there's a common programming task, chances are there's already a library that can help you perform that task. So for instance, if I want to calculate the sum of a list of values, there's a built-in sum function, which we'll introduce in part 1, that is able to receive a list and give you back that total. You don't have to figure out how to calculate that total. The sum function already knows how to do that for you. And we're going to see lots of different instances like that as we introduce you to various aspects of the Python standard library and other third-party libraries as well. Now, with respect to the Intro to Data Science sections, our goal is to get you thinking about data science and various topics related to it in preparation for the high-end case studies that you'll be looking at in parts 4 and 5 of these live lessons videos. So in lesson 1 through 4 in this part, we're going to start to introduce some key things like basic descriptive statistics and also start talking about getting to know your data, which is going to be a key aspect of any data science study you perform.